Hi, Vera. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you.
I'm really excited to talk to you as well. I'm going to talk about a few different things, but before we get started, if you could please introduce yourself and let the audience know what it is that you do.
Yeah, my name is Sally Loftus. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in the United States, the great state of North Carolina, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I have a 100% woman owned human resources consulting firm where I really focus on strategy with organizations who are trying to build in people positive approaches to their leadership and practices. And I also specialize in pay structures, specifically pay equity and pay transparency. So I get to do a lot of work in the ways that people get paid.
That's amazing. And I'm seeing a lot of conversation on LinkedIn and other places around pay transparency.
hmm
So, can you explain what that is and why it's so important?
Yeah, a lot of times people know about pay transparency because potentially a law has been passed where they live. And so they might actually learn about pay transparency because they're trying to be compliant with that law. And
Mm,
so, what I've seen so far is that, most of these laws are about posting what the salary ranges are for a job opening in the actual posting so people have an idea of what they're posting for. There are laws around the internal work that needs to be done around that, which is a lot of what I do. Is that, making sure that you also kind of share that same kind of information with the people who already work there. Because a lot of times people will just go be legally compliant and then they don't talk to their employees about it. And then their employees see on a job, posting that this person's getting paid more than they are. And, it really destroys trust pretty quickly.
mhm, mhm. Why is it important to have pay transparency, whether it's on a job posting or whether it's, letting your employees know what other people are making or where they stand in the salary?
Yeah, I believed in pay transparency before the COVID-19 pandemic happened, but so much about us have changed in the last 4 or 5 years, right? And we got used to a level of transparency with each other and
Mm,
authenticity that a lot of people are really struggling when going back to the office or going back to work and not feeling like they're really getting all the information. And pay transparency is a really great example of that. So being able to say, okay, I take this job and here's, be able to look and say, for instance, here's a range of pay as long as I have this job. And here are the clear steps to increase my pay and ways to advance my career here because too often people either don't know those things or maybe the organization doesn't have that information and or they're only able to get increases maybe through performance reviews, which that's a whole nother podcast
mhm,
of performance reviews and the issues around that.
mhm. Interesting. You are writing a book, which is so
hmm
amazing, and I commend you so much for that because I can only imagine how much work it is. And your book is about pay equity, and I'm
hmm
curious to know because I think there's lots of confusion about what that means, and I'm
hmm
curious to know from your perspective, what is the definition of pay equity?
Yes, pay equity. I mean, it's certainly a topic. You can go on TikTok and watch a lot of videos about it, right? There's a lot of conversations and there are a lot of descriptions out there. I use pay equity as an kind of an umbrella term for a lot of things. So, thinking about people getting paid for what they're doing equally across departments, across the organization, also based on what they're bringing into the job. So, what happens is that a lot of times organizations don't necessarily have, this kind of wizard behind the curtain being like, we're going to pay women less. Maybe they do. I don't know. I haven't seen that yet. But, typically what it is because of how they structure their pay ranges around work experience or technical skills or education or things like that. So, for instance, a woman maybe who has a gap in her employment, right? Due to a job loss, maybe a life situation, stayed home to take care of the kids, things like that may look like they don't have as much quote unquote work experience, right? And so they're not getting paid as much as maybe their peers are,
Mm,
even though
mhm,
they have experience maybe in different ways, right? Because they could have been doing other things, volunteering, doing whatever kind of work. And so that's how those pay gaps start and then continue from there.
Mhm. Do you find that changing at all now, like with different laws and also more men going on paternity leave or parental leave or I think it's called different things. But do you
Mhm.
see that shifting or do you still see
Mhm.
that there's a pay gap or
Mhm.
pay discrimination even that doesn't favor women? Or do you see that changing? Like, what are your
Mm.
thoughts on that?
It is slowly but surely getting better for women. I will say one of the gaps I see right now is in the caregiver space. And of course, that can be multiple genders, right? Within the caregiver space, is that, right now there is such a huge childcare crisis. And I'm going to speak within the United States. I can't speak specifically with Canada, but
Mhm.
people don't have access to childcare. There's long waiting lists. The cost is like a mortgage payment, things like that. So a lot more people are staying home now because it's cheaper. And I do see this perception out there, right? Which I would say is discrimination of like, nobody will work anymore, and I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, have you tried to like go pay for childcare lately?
Mhm.
To work. And so I'm curious how that is going to be going forward because I do think there are going to be more men that will have that on their resume. And I think also as we have the sandwich generation of people right now who are caring for older parents potentially and for children, that just puts a lot of strain on a person. And so, especially if they're not getting paid according to the cost of living. So it can be a real mess.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing that a lot with, even in my own personal life and within my friends circle and my acquaintance
Hmm.
circle is that there's definitely that sandwich generation that we're
Hmm.
at where we're looking after our kids. And some of us have young
Hmm.
kids, maybe older
Hmm.
kids, we're looking after our parents. So it is going to be interesting to see because historically, men have sort of dominated the workplace and the rules and the policies
Hmm.
around pay. And like you said, they typically haven't been the stay-at-home parent, and so
Hmm.
women have tended to face this gap of, well, what were you doing for the last 5 years or 10 years or 2 years or
Hmm.
whatever it is that they took off to
Right.
look after their kids. And so it's going to be interesting to see as more men to either take parental leave or take
Hmm.
caregiver leave or look after
Hmm.
their aging parents, if that's going to change the narrative a little bit because all of a sudden, hey, it's not fair, quote unquote, whereas it's something that women have been facing for years and years, right?
Yeah, and I'm thinking about, like, for instance, whenever I decided to stay home for a little while with our kids, I was working at a financial institution, and I was a senior vice president. And so I took, several years off and then went back into the workforce. And you would have thought, like, for like, if all my SVP knowledge would have seeped out of my brain, like all of a sudden, like
Mhm.
it was like, well, it's been a few years. Well, I still have a brain.
Mhm.
I wanted to be like, and so there is like this discrimination of like, oh, they've been out of it. Like there's only one path
Mhm.
to being this really high performing executive or whatever. And part of it is going to be us kind of opening up that there, as like thinking about caregiving, like managing people's doctor's appointments. And it's like a project management role, right?
Mhm.
Of, trying to do caregivers and pharmacists and, all that stuff. So we've really got to kind of open our minds a lot to the different skills we build through the care work we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to shift the conversation a little bit, like in your work, because you are a women-owned organization and you have women that work for you and with you.
Mhm.
What's been your experience with women asking for what they're worth in
Mm,
terms of salary, in terms of pay? Because my understanding is, and even from my own personal experience, is that we tend not to want to talk about money. We tend not to
mhm,
want to negotiate for ourselves or stand up for
mhm,
ourselves. What's been
mhm.
your experience with that?
Yeah, wow, if I could demystify pay with a magic wand for everyone, I would do it because I do that a lot with my clients who are typically businesses of, at the business level, times people will be like, "Well, I don't know why people get paid," and what they get paid. So one thing when kinda looking at the individual and specifically women is you absolutely should be paid for what you're worth. Like, if you need anybody to tell you that, I'm your person, right? Like That's it, you got it. The other piece is it's really important to inform yourself with information, right? Because we have so many pay transparency laws and things are leaning that way, go out and look at your job description and compare it to the market and kind of pull some live data so that you can kind of have a good understanding of what people in your position are getting paid in other, at other companies or whatever. So you can be like, look, this is kind of comparable. Now, there is a risk involved in doing that, right? That they could say, no, it could be you're fearful you lose your job. But I mean, I think it's really important to have information and to ask the questions and also to kind of manage expectations. I'm finding that um, some of the generations behind me want pay increases more frequently than like
Mm.
an annual pay increase. So they'll be like, well, I didn't get a pay increase in the first 6 months. So, you know, I need to leave or whatever. And it's just really trying to kind of manage our expectations and having those clear conversations with your supervisor or your hiring person about kind of what can I expect going forward.
Mhm. That's really good advice about getting information and doing the research and arming yourself with that knowledge.
Mhm.
The women that I work with have gone through a major life change, a divorce or job loss typically,
Mhm.
or other major life change, which tends to knock their confidence off the table, right? And so all of a sudden, they're feeling not worthy, they're feeling not
Mhm.
capable, they're already like
Mhm.
struggling, or getting through
Mhm.
whatever they're going through, like a divorce, right? Or a
Mhm.
job loss, they're already feeling shaky in their confidence or self-esteem. And so I hear a lot, I just want to get a job, right? I just want to get a job that I
Mhm.
like, treated well, and they're almost like nervous or scared to talk about money because to your point,
Mhm.
what if they don't get it? What if they say no?
Mhm.
And their confidence is already shaken. So I feel like arming
Mhm.
yourself with information is probably one really great way to start building up your confidence because you have data, right? You have
Mhm.
actual information that you can present. And I also feel like working with someone like you or working with someone like me or somebody else
Mhm.
to kind of coach you through how
Mhm.
to have those difficult and sometimes awkward conversations around money.
Yeah, and I think about like, of course, I've worked in human resources for all my career. So thinking about sitting on the side of being the hiring manager, being the HR manager, if somebody came in and we were talking about money, and I've had this happen many times, be like, "Hey, I researched this job," and just not like you have to pay me this, not coming in and being like, this is it, but just saying, "Hey, when you start talking about salary, start asking early in the interview process, what, the pay range is so you can kind of start understanding what it is, start thinking about it, start asking for, but, about the benefits, things like that. But I have appreciated whenever people have come in with that information because it shows me that they're invested in that job
Mhm,
enough to kind of do that work. Not saying
mhm,
you have to do it, but I mean, like it shows a level of investment and kind of smarts
mhm.
um, in the process. And then if they say no to the higher number, I mean, the worst could happen is just they say no, we can't do that, or they typically most people will counter back in some way or be like, oh no, this is it, and
Mhm.
it's worth to me. It seems like it's always worth the asking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even sometimes having that ask, like being
Hmm.
courageous enough to have that
Hmm.
conversation and
Hmm.
stepping into that worthiness is enough to build up that confidence. So even if the answer is no or the answer is
Hmm.
not as much, I feel like that would still make women feel like, okay, but I did it. Like I did the hard thing and it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be.
Mhm,
And I really stepped into my own value and therefore I'm building up my confidence as I go along. So the next conversation is going to
mhm.
be a little bit easier, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to a situation where when I first started my business, almost 5 years ago, where I had one of my first clients after kinda working together about 9 months was like, "Sally, you are not charging enough for the
Mm,
level of work that you're bringing in." I
mm,
was like, "What?" And she was like, "Literally, like, you need to double, like,
wow.
what you're charging, because this is compared to kinda this is what we pay other consultants doing this level of work." And I would have never known that unless she had told me,
Mhm,
right? And so I
mhm,
kinda started kinda, upping, prices a little bit and trying to kinda package things differently. And, I wish there was, again, a magic wand to tell you how to price all your consulting stuff, but
Mhm.
you don't. But I mean, like, it really, I don't think I would have taken that step if somebody else hadn't encouraged me to do it.
That brings up a really important point, right? You and I talk a lot about community,
Mhm.
women supporting each other, and I think
Mhm.
that's a really key one, right? When we see
Mhm.
someone that is adding a ton of value and maybe
Mhm.
undervaluing themselves or maybe not feeling 100% confident, to
Mhm.
really encourage her, right? To
Mhm.
support her and to sometimes you need that advice from an outside person, right?
Mhm.
And women need that encouragement. So I love that you brought that up because now you can counsel people that you work with around what their
Mhm.
value is and encourage them, right? To ask for more money or negotiate or ask for something different or package things up. So I just love that advice so much about encouraging each other. And, that's a really good segue into our event that we're holding on March the 8th. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that event? I'm so excited about it.
I am too. I'm really excited. So March 8th is International Women's Day, if you don't know that. And so this is something celebrated all over the world. And Vera and I are going to hold an event, and we're calling it From Panic to Power. And really talking about like how, at least for me, I can say in my client work, in coaching and things like that, and even I can say in myself, seeing people have like kind of a cautious or fearful. Maybe sometimes it shows up as anxiety. Mine shows up as like being super busy, because if I'm super busy, I don't have to think about how I'm feeling. But
Mm,
kind of getting into these routines that sometimes don't set us up for success, and we
mhm,
lose out on opportunities in that. So we're really going to kind of talk about those things that people are feeling right now. I think especially coming out of the pandemic,
mhm.
and kind of see how that shows up, and then talk through some strategies that you can use from day one going forward to really kind of step more into your power.
Yes. And for me, panic means overwhelm, right? It
Mm,
means that I'm like to your point, either too busy, like taking on
mhm,
too much and then not knowing how to take things off my plate,
mhm,
or just feeling like this anxious feeling in my body, right? And then my mind just goes on overdrive. I'm like,
mhm,
I can't get anything done because when you're in this fight, flight, or freeze mode, you just can't think clearly, right? So for me, it's like not being able to think clearly, being super panicked, like being on overdrive and just like doing a bunch of stuff without really thinking it through and maybe not making the right decisions. And so, yeah, I love that we're going to talk about some simple practical strategies, right? It doesn't have to take
mhm,
long to
mhm,
get yourself centered and grounded and get yourself out of that panic mode. Um, and I think we're also going to talk a little bit about how leaders, like if you're a leader of an organization, how you can support the people on your team because it's all over the place. Like it's team leaders that are feeling
mhm,
panic, it's your team that's feeling panic. People are coming from a lot of different circumstances. Things are going, we talked about caregiving, childcare
mhm,
expenses,
mhm,
everything's going up in price, and all these things are going on in people's lives. They're going through a
mhm,
divorce, they're dealing with other things.
mhm,
It always amazes me how much people are going through and they don't
mhm.
necessarily talk about it or bring it, but yet it's impacting their day-to-day work life and they're feeling panicked.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. At the end of last year, one of our kids had a pretty serious mental health crisis. And in that process, like, I just completely felt gutted, right? And so I was just trying to kind of function every day, and then trying to kind of draw on support, and then trying to, keep my business somewhat going, and try to provide a sense of normalcy for the other kid at home. I mean, like, and it was just like, you know, I kind of felt hollowed out, a
Hmm.
little bit. And I got some really great advice from a friend who was like, you just need to get really present, because I
Mm,
was just continuously like, I would try to go to sleep at night and like continuously snowballing what could happen next.
mhm,
And that was like some of the best advice that I could do,
mm,
was just like, okay, how do I get really present in this moment? And it doesn't
mhm.
solve everything, but it
Right.
certainly helps my nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. It is about regulating your nervous system, right? Because when things like that
Mhm.
happen, we get dysregulated,
Mhm.
right? So it's about finding strategies to help regulate your nervous system. And sure, it's not going to solve all the problems, but if you're feeling centered and even a tiny bit more calm, you're
Mhm.
able to then think about, okay, well, what needs to happen right now? Right? What needs to
Mhm.
happen next? Instead of thinking like 5 steps ahead. That's what I tend to do. Like, oh my gosh, I got all this stuff on my plate. I'm
Mhm.
never going to get it done. And I get into this spiral of negativity or the spiral of anxiety. And I just keep thinking about all the things that I have to do versus like, okay, if I could just do one thing at a time, right? It's all going to
Mhm.
get done. Keep reminding myself about that. It's all going to happen. And maybe even delete some things off your to do list completely, right? Which I know sounds crazy. But again, thinking about it calmly and steadily, you can say, like, you know what, actually, I don't need to do that thing. So I
Mhm.
think there's lots of different strategies that we can take. But I love that idea of getting into the present moment
Mhm.
because it stops you from thinking about the future and panicking about it, and it stops you from ruminating about the past, which is also a really awful thing, especially when you're trying to sleep at night and you just keep thinking about, I should have done this, why didn't I do that?
Yes.
Right? And sleep, as we know, was like one of the most important things that we can do to get ourselves into a more powerful position.
Yeah, one of the few, like, things I've done since the beginning of the year is not wear my Apple Watch on the weekends, which kinda sounds
Mm,
crazy. I'm also, like, a very driven person, so I really like closing my fitness loops, on my Apple Watch, and so to not do that, like, I might do it, but of course I don't have my watch, but it's so nice to feel less
mhm,
detached to
mhm,
technology on the weekend.
mhm.
It's just really refreshing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to put the link to register in
Mhm.
in the notes, but maybe just tell the details of when the actual event is and the time
Sure.
and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, so it's Friday, March 8th. It is going to be 1 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And so maybe around lunchtime for some people. It is going to be a virtual event. It's free. You can see the link here. Go to Loftus Partners and click on the link. We would love for you to join us. And we're going to be really excited. It's going to be interactive. We're excited about bringing a community of women together on International Women's Day. I mean, what a great way to spend the day, right? An hour with people, really talking about how to build strength as a woman.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I hear from a lot of women that they feel alone. They feel like they're the only ones going
Mhm,
through something, which I find so
mhm,
heartbreaking because as soon as you start talking to anybody, you realize, oh my goodness, they're going through something. And bringing that together into a virtual room or into even an in person room,
mhm,
whatever works, is to me one of the number one things is to know, hey, I'm not alone. Other people are going through maybe different things, right?
mhm,
But just having that knowledge that I have support, I can give, I can receive wisdom and guidance from other women.
mhm.
I find that deep conversation is can be so healing and so empowering and just so getting you into the present moment
Mhm.
and getting you feeling like, okay, I can do this. There's hope, right? There's other women that are walking beside me and giving me energy, which is what we need right now in our world.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that point up because I think going back to the mental health crisis with one of our kids, one was I couldn't get over how many people I talked to who were like, "Oh yeah, my niece went through that," or my, whatever. And I'm like, "Wait, why are we not talking about that?"
Mhm.
But and then the other piece is like being open and being like, "I kind of feel like a failure as a parent right now."
Mm,
And
mm,
people being like, "I feel that way all the time." Or
mhm,
like, "Oh, I feel you." And how much weirdly hope that gave me of like, okay, this is not just me. I mean, and there were
mhm.
people who'd be like, oh, you're a great parent and that's great. But like just having other people who were like, yeah, I totally feel that and understand the struggle was so powerful, just even in those few words.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's why I'm so excited to bring this event to people because it will bring women together. We can have those wonderful, deep conversations. I find sometimes that giving of our own experience and sharing stories and sharing our own wisdom is also part of the healing process. As much as we need it, it's also so nice to give back and support, right? And so how can we fill our cups? And I feel a big piece of that is community, is connection, is
Mhm.
having conversations and knowing that you're not you're not alone in any of this. So I'm super excited. I'm looking forward to it so much. It's a great way to celebrate International Women's Day. So sign up, bring a friend, bring a colleague, bring your sister,
Mhm.
bring your bestie, whatever. Invite people. The more, the more the merrier. And we're going to have a really wonderful conversation and share some really, really amazing techniques and strategies to get out of panic and into power.
Yes, looking forward to it. Hope you will definitely join us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sally. This has been a really great conversation. I'll have you back on once you write your book because I want to hear all about that process and what you learned from that. And I know it's going to be a whole other conversation. So we'll definitely do this again. But for now, I really appreciate you. And I look forward to our March 8th event.
Thank you, Vera. I appreciate the opportunity and really appreciate all that you're putting into the world.
Awesome. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.